Nicola Sturgeon saying that she wouldn't rule out a no-fly zone in Ukraine. As always, do get in touch, GBViews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at GBNews. That and so much more between 2 and 4. But first, at the top of the hour, is the very latest news.
Thank you, Darren. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Officials in the Ukrainian city of Mariupol say Russia is continuing its attacks, making it impossible for trapped civilians to leave. The Ukrainian military has released this video, which it says shows the aftermath of an assault on a residential area in the city. 400,000 people have been without power or water for more than a week, and several attempts to set up a humanitarian corridor have failed. Yesterday, an airstrike on a maternity hospital in the city left 3 people dead, including a child, and at least 17 wounded. The Ukrainian president has called the attack a war crime. Damien was studying in the northeastern city of Sumy when Russia's invasion of Ukraine started. He told GB News he was living in fear before he fled to Hungary.
Every night we go to bomb shelters. That's where we sleep. That's where we. Bomb shelters. It's in the cold. There is no heater there. The electricity went out. They actually bombed out a power plant. So the electricity was going off and on. The water supply was dirty. So if you didn't have any water stored up, you just have to drink it. You no other options. The food was running out. The whole thing was just we were just living in fear.
Well, the Home Secretary says Ukrainian refugees with passports can now apply fully online to come to the UK. It means application centres in Europe can focus on helping those who don't have passports. It's after the Ukrainian ambassador to the UK called on Britain to ditch the bureaucratic red tape. Priti Patel told the Commons she's streamlining the approach to those fleeing the conflict.
From Tuesday, I can announce that Ukrainians with passports will no longer need to go to a visa application centre to give their biometrics before they come to the UK. Instead, once their application has been considered and appropriate checks completed, they will receive direct notification that they are eligible for the scheme and can come to the UK. In short, Ukrainians with passports will be able to get permission to come here fully online from wherever they are, and will be able to give their biometrics once in Britain.
Priti Patel speaking earlier. US Vice President Kamala Harris has announced America will give another $50 million to Ukraine in humanitarian aid. Speaking alongside the Polish president in Warsaw, she also said America's delivered Patriot missile systems to Poland, which can track and intercept ballistic missiles. Vice President Harris added that America is prepared to defend every inch of NATO territory.
What compels us also is the moral outrage that all civilized nations feel when we look at what is happening to innocent men, women, children, grandmothers, grandfathers, who are fleeing everything they've known.
Well, the Prime Minister says soldiers who go absent without leave to fight in Ukraine will face a court-martial when they return to the UK. Boris Johnson says despite the clear distinction between good and evil in the conflict, no one should be going to fight. It's after the British Army announced a small number of soldiers have disobeyed orders and gone AWOL. There are fears they may have travelled to Ukraine to fight Russian troops. Sports Minister Nadine Dorries says Roman Abramovich must not benefit if Chelsea Football Club is sold. Mr Abramovich was added to the UK sanctions list this morning. Described as a pro-Kremlin oligarch, the Chelsea owner has been hit with an asset freeze and a travel ban. The government has issued an initial licence to enable Chelsea Football Club to continue to train, play its fixtures and fulfil its obligations for the rest of the season. Labour's calling on the government to ramp up its production of green power amid rising global energy prices. A survey by Compare the Market suggests a third of families are struggling to pay their household bills. It's as fuel prices hit a record high of 159.6 pence per litre for petrol and 167.4 pence for diesel. The government says it'll unveil its energy supply strategy in the coming days. That's after committing to phase out Russian oil imports by the end of the year. And NHS England says a record 6.1 million people are on waiting lists for routine hospital treatment. Over 311,000 patients have been waiting more than a year, and a quarter of suspected cancer patients failed to see a specialist within 2 weeks. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though it's back to the briefing with Darren McCaffrey.
Yeah, very good afternoon. Welcome to the programme. It is, coming up to 7 minutes to 2 o'clock on this Thursday afternoon. Thank you very much indeed for your company. If you're tuning in to see Alex Phillips, sorry to disappoint you. She's having a well-earned holiday and will be back soon. But over the next 2 hours, we'll be covering the latest situation in Ukraine and reaction throughout the UK, because over the last 24 hours, we've seen some harrowing reports, haven't we, come from Ukraine. Yesterday, Russian forces launched that attack against a children's hospital in the southern city of Mariupol, injuring 6 and killing 3. President Zelensky called it a war crime. Meanwhile, here in the UK, the government has added Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich to its sanction lists against Russian oligarchs. We got some details through in the last couple of minutes about what that means, including that Chelsea will not be allowed to be put up for sale. There'll be no transfers, no new tickets if you're not a season ticket holder, no kit sold in clubs either, essentially a football club put on ice to a large degree. Let's speak to the Conservative MP for Lichfield. That is Michael Fabricant, who joins us down the line. Michael, very good afternoon to you. First of all, your thoughts on Roman Abramovich. What would you say to those Chelsea fans who might feel aggrieved about what's happening to their club and frankly, maybe not understand it?
I think most people do understand it. Everybody's watching the news. I think everybody's been absolutely horrified by what's happened, particularly the bombing of the young children's home in Mariupol yesterday. I'd be very surprised, actually, if any Chelsea fans had a great deal of sympathy for Abramovich.
In saying that, I suppose what I'm trying to get at in terms of understanding it is, has the government been clear to people that many of these sanctions, they have a boomerang effect, and they affect us as well? It's the same with energy prices and inflation. Are people, do you think, are your constituents that you've spoken to prepared, happy that these sanctions are necessary, but also that they will hit us as well at home?
Yes, I think that's a very good question. I think people are very, very pleased that there are sanctions. I'm not so sure that people understand what the consequences in Britain will be for those sanctions. And I think it would actually be quite helpful if the Prime Minister, in fact, I will suggest this to him, were to address the nation rather like he used to do very regularly with COVID, and explain what we are doing, but what the possible consequences might be for the British public. We know already that fuel prices are going up. They're going up all over the world. In 2 weeks' time, Rishi Sunak will be presenting his spring statement. So hopefully there will be some mitigation, some additional mitigation for that. But, what's going to happen in the future? That needs to be explained. But like everything in the future, nobody knows for sure what the consequences will be. We don't know how long this war will be going on for. I noticed, by the way, Volodymyr Zelensky has just tweeted that he has spoken this morning to Boris Johnson and President Macron. He says he's discussed the war crimes of Russia against the Ukrainian people, but he's also talked about further military support that he will get from the United Kingdom. We've already supplied now 3,615 NLAW very, very effective anti-tank, military vehicle, ground-to-ground missile systems to the Ukrainians. We supplied many of them before the war began because we anticipated that this was going to happen. We're also supplying javelins. Interesting that he tweets that with President Macron, he focused on peace talks with the president. And of course, this is what President Macron is trying to present to the French people as he faces a general election, that he can negotiate peace with Putin. Well, I just wonder whether the French people believe that.
Well, in saying that, it is always important to carry on talking, many would say. Gerhard Schroeder, the rather disgraced, I would say, former German Chancellor in Moscow today with Vladimir Putin, doing precisely that. Michael, just to come back, though, you touched on it, didn't you, that spring statement, the mini budget we're expecting in a couple of weeks. At the moment, the government put forward 350 quid, essentially, to try and mitigate rising inflation, particularly when it comes to energy prices. Now, that was before what has happened in Ukraine. That's simply not going to cut it. They're going to have to go a hell of a lot further, aren't they?
They are. I mean, whether the nation can afford it, what it'll do for the value of the pound, I don't know. We've seen how the ruble has crashed. A ruble at the moment is now worth only half 1 penny when it used to be worth £1. So, I mean, it really has plummeted recently. We don't want to see the same thing happening here because there's got to be confidence, world confidence in the British economy. But you are right. People will need help with this. I mean, it's such a shame, actually, when you compare the United Kingdom with France. 80% of all electricity production in France is produced by 40 nuclear power stations. And of course, it was the decision of the Labour government, and sadly, the Conservatives didn't do that much about it either, to close nuclear power stations. We should be opening them, not closing it. And it's something we're now actively exploring. As also we're exploring, as Tom Harwood talked about this morning, the possible reintroduction of fracking. But none of this will happen instantly.
In fact, in some ways, those are much more medium, long-term things that may help. In the short term, too, also, we've got the expectation of a national insurance rise in just a couple of weeks. Also changes to income tax thresholds, which means the average taxpayer having to pay, in addition to the rising cost of living, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds extra tax from April. Again, is that sustainable? You're going to be hitting people in the pocket twice.
Well, it's very easy asking me because I'm a backbench MP by choice because I left the government over HS2. Look, if I were Chancellor, I can say I would like to see far greater support for individuals in what is really going to be a cost of living crisis. But it's easy for me and opposition MPs also to say, it's what can the country afford. But I will be sitting there in 2 weeks' time, and I hope that Rishi Sunak, he said when COVID began, he will do everything it takes. I hope he will be able to do, he may not be able to do, but I hope he will be able to do everything it takes to try and protect people from this cost of living crisis. Now, of course, people realize it's worldwide, but when it actually affects you in the pocket, that actually isn't a great deal of comfort that others are suffering too.
Yeah, isn't that the point, though, Michael? I mean, yeah, you're right, inflation is a worldwide problem, but there are very few countries putting up taxes at precisely the same time. We'll have to wait and see what the Chancellor has to say. I just want to come and focus a little bit on the refugees as well. We're just going to pause for a moment. Let's have a listen into what Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary, had to say in the Commons a little bit earlier on this.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to say to the Home Secretary, why does it always take being hauled into the House of Commons to make basic changes to help vulnerable people who are fleeing from the Ukraine? A maternity hospital was bombed yesterday, an attack on newborn babies and women giving birth. People are fleeing for their lives, and up to now the response from the Home Office has been a total disgrace, bringing shame upon our country. We've had a 90-year-old Holocaust survivor left in makeshift accommodation in Poland, even though her granddaughter was struggling to get here. Mums with small kids told they can't get an appointment for weeks or having to queue for days to get biometrics in freezing weather weather in Rzeszów, only to be told they then have to travel 200 miles to Warsaw to pick up their visas. Now, it is welcome that she's now introducing the online approach that we know they tried different ways of doing for the Hong Kong visas, but why has it taken so long when she's had intelligence for weeks, if not months, that she needed to prepare for a Russian invasion of Ukraine? And why still, if we've still got to wait until Tuesday for this new system to come in, what is to happen for everybody else in the meantime? Why is she not bringing in the armed forces? They've offered to help. We've had 1,000 troops on standby to provide humanitarian help for 2 weeks. So why not use them now to set up the emergency centres and to get people passported through as rapidly as possible and get them into the country? And what about the Ukrainian nurse here on a healthcare visa? Is she finally to be allowed to bring her elderly parents to the country, something we've asked for so long? And is this still just being restricted to those with family? Are they still going to have to fill in multiple online forms, or would she now say that all those who want to come to the UK, who have fled the fighting in Ukraine, can now come here without having to fill in loads of online forms or jump through a whole load of hoops?
Michael, is the government being inhumane in all of this, or is it simply incompetence, or maybe it's a combination of both?
You know, a great Labour Home Secretary once said, quite relatively recently, and he repeated it again recently, it was John Reid, and he said, you know, the Home Office is dysfunctional. It was dysfunctional under Labour, and in many ways, it's still dysfunctional. And I think I can understand, you know, Priti Patel's utter frustration. I know that she has been trying to get the visa arrangements changed for the last few weeks, but it's like fighting through porridge in the Home Office at times. It should have been done sooner. And, you know, I heard Yvette Cooper's rant, and I sympathise with much of what she had to say. Whether she would have been able to do any better is another question. It's the structure of the Home Office. Personally, you know, John Reid broke up the Home Office and moved certain aspects of it into justice. I wonder whether the Home Office should be broken up still further. It's just
I
very
think, Michael,
large
John
and
Reid also used, I think he also used the quote that it wasn't fit for purpose, and that was because he took over from Charles Clarke, as far as I remember, who'd resigned. So maybe in politics, the buck stops with the boss. Isn't it time Priti Patel, who's presided over numerous problems in the Home Office, has to take some responsibility for this?
I just think resigning is not going to help the situation. It's trying to get things done. At least we've seen this change that from next Tuesday. It's a shame it's not today, but then, you know, that's the way things work, it seems, with the Home Office. But from next Tuesday, at least, a lot of people, the majority of refugees from Ukraine, will be able to apply for visas online. Having said that, there are particular people who are coming from Ukraine who aren't actually Ukrainian citizens. Some still hold Russian passports. Just historically, they never got them changed. Some hold other passports, and they'll have to go through the system as they did before. But some of it's not really clearly understood by people. For example, there were a huge number of people who turned up, refugees at Calais, and it was a deliberate move by the government not to have a station in Calais to deal with them, because we didn't want large numbers appearing and then become subject to slave traffickers who would get them trying to get across on the English Channel, and that's not the way to do it. Because almost as many people sink in the English Channel as do get across to our shores, and that's not always actually recognised. But yes, it is an incredibly difficult situation, and I think Priti Patel is moving it as fast as she can through what I said earlier on. Was a very porridgey situation, something Alan Clarke discovered, something John Reid discovered, and indeed Theresa May before her.
Michael, as always, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Michael Fabricant there, joining us from Lichfield, his constituency, the Conservative MP. Get in touch, GBViews at gbnews.uk. Now, more than 2 million people have fled the war in Ukraine. It's the worst refugee crisis since World War II. Some of them have relatives of people living here in the UK itself. And our reporter, Amelia Harper, has been speaking to one woman who fears that her mother is trapped and in danger of going hungry in Ukraine.
For every person trying to flee Ukraine, there are many who can't. One of them is Nina, a grandmother stuck in a small village in northern Ukraine, just south of the Belarus border. Her daughter, Natalia Scott, doesn't know if she's okay.
Nobody can contact her. I was looking to find a way to call the landline of like a local village kind of authority or their village hall or whatever, but it wasn't possible. However, I found a person who could manage to phone there, and he was said over phone that we are not allowed to talk, and hung up a phone. So I assume that the people who in charge now there, not Ukrainians.
Зараз абонент знаходиться поза зоною досяжності. Будь ласка, залиште повідомлення після сигналу.
You don't know if she has food. You don't know how dangerous where she is. I know she doesn't have electricity. I know that she doesn't have food supply. So whatever she had, that's only what she has. And maybe she's in danger of hunger. I don't know. It's all possible, that horrible scenario. So it's just I don't know how to describe the way I feel. It's just horrible.
Across the UK, Ukrainian protesters mourn for the fate of their families.
My heart is broken. My heart is broken for every person who has been hurt, who's been terrorised, who's been made to leave their homes and built and hide in cellars because of that maniac. That's how I feel, but at the same time, I'm so proud of our nation.
16-year-old Stefan reflects on what life is like for his relatives.
I think about my family there. I visit them, I've been there. I see the pictures of the city that I've walked around, the streets, the monuments I've seen, and they're not the same. It's hard to concentrate in school. It's hard to do my homework properly when I'm thinking about whilst I'm in the warmth of my home with good clothing, a soft bed, what are my family doing? Making improvised arms, things like making Molotov cocktails. Whilst I'm there sitting in a comfy chair writing about something to do with biology. I can't stand it.
Help our refugees! Help our refugees! Help our refugees!
From the UK, the message is clear. Amelia Harper, GB News.
OK, we're going to pause there on the briefing. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, we'll be on the Ukrainian-Polish border with the very latest. But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather. It's glorious here in London. Not elsewhere. Here's the metals.
Hello, a good deal of cloud around through the rest of this afternoon and in fact the next few days and into the weekend. There will be occasional brighter spells and it will be generally on the breezy side. Now, what we've got at the moment is high pressure across the continent, and that's blocking these weather fronts from making much progress. So the setup is fairly stationary. This weather front with us at the moment bringing a lot of cloud across the country through this afternoon into the evening, and in fact little change overnight. A southerly flow of air feeding some quite mild air in our direction, and again that's the case right the way through the next few days. So we start Friday on a rather cloudy note, but a fairly mild one, quite breezy conditions, and that will be the case through much of the day on Friday as well. So a good deal of cloud around, some outbreaks of generally fairly light rain and drizzle at first, but then this second area of low pressure develops to the southwest of the country, and that will gradually make its way northwards through the course of the day, bringing some more persistent rain for a time. And then as that starts to clear, turning more showery from the southwest. But it's another fairly mild day, temperatures above where they would normally be at this time of year, although it will be quite a windy day for just about all of us. Now, as we head through Friday evening, these showers will continue. Some really quite heavy downpours are possible at times, but there will be some clearer spells around as well. And those showers stay with us right the way through the night and into the start of Saturday. So with quite a lot of cloud around and that warm southerly flow, it will once again be a fairly mild night. So we start the weekend with some showery outbreaks of rain possible just about anywhere. We will start to see those showers fading away from the south for a time ahead of this next area of low pressure, which pushes in for the weekend. So all in all, the weekend is looking fairly cloudy on the breezy side, but remaining fairly mild.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Very welcome back to GB News. It is, 28 minutes past 2 o'clock on this Thursday afternoon. Thank you for your company. Now, more than 2 million refugees have fled Ukraine to seek safety after Russia's invasion of its neighbour began just over 2 weeks ago. Most of those who have fled have gone to Poland. That's to Ukraine's west, with large numbers also entering Hungary, Moldova, Romania and Slovakia. The journey, in many cases, lasting several days. Well, our reporter, Bradley Harris, is in a city, the closest one to the Ukrainian border in Poland. Bradley, over to you.
Yeah, we've actually been driving around Przemysl, a city very close to the border between Ukraine and Poland. We stopped off at what we thought was a Tesco supermarket here in Poland. It turns out it's a DIY refugee centre. It's no longer a Tesco, although there are still logos dotted around. Inside there are beds, there are places to drink, there's a man carrying a vat of hot water and a boy with a high-vis jacket on holding loaves of bread. So that is currently in operation underway. Volunteers just setting this place up themselves. Inside it's like a shopping centre, but now transformed into a place that is supporting Ukrainian refugees. Another place that is supporting people is actually this humanitarian aid van that we've come across. And this chap, I'm just going to knock on the door, is Paul. You've come all the way from where?
High Wycombe.
High Wycombe. And just tell me, why are you here today?
I just want to help out, really. I came on Friday just to drop off a whole van load of aid. Dropped it off, saw the news, Sky News, on the news, and it was just a mess. So I came to the border. I've been working at another refuge centre. I came here today. It's just a mess. Inside, there's thousands of people who need help. They all need distributing. There's more people coming to this place than leaving. So I was here. I was supposed to be here for 2 days. I've even got my football stuff with me.
You got your football? They're your football boots?
I've got all my football stuff with me. I was supposed to be coming back, playing football, and it's just changed. And I don't mind. I've got a business. It's kind of self-running itself, so I can just help out as much as possible. I've got friends coming over with minibuses and organised a few things. I just want to help people. It's just a mess.
And this is your life, Paul. This van.
For the time being, yeah. This is. I took a family to Prague. There was a bloke with his son. His wife had died, and he was travelling with his sister. There's a wife. There's two people. I took him to Prague. 9 hours it took to go. And then I had 2 hours in the back of the van and 9 hours back to help again.
Paul, what's in the van? Do you mind if we take a look? Okay, we're going to have a look inside Paul's van. Let's go around this way. Like I say, it's people not just from Poland, from the UK. I've seen people from Spain. Paul, what do we have?
So I've been working at another refugee camp. They're running short on food, so I've been asked to provide bread. I've got sausages. They've got these open fires, so I've got these briquette things. So people are standing around trying to keep warm.
It's bitterly cold.
It's bitterly cold. This other place is just ridiculous. I've got all my sleeping stuff.
Are you sleeping here?
I am sometimes. Sometimes I'm in hostels and stuff. And sometimes if I can't get a hostel, everything's rammed around it. Everything. So I don't mind sleeping in there. I don't mind roughing it for 2 or 3 weeks to help these people out. It's just a mess.
Incredible work that you're doing. You obviously feel very strongly about what's going on over in Ukraine.
I do, yeah. I've got loads of support though back in England. So I've got translators who are working with me over the phone. I've got people who are kind of helping out financially. I've got people from the Cayman Islands sending money. It's really, I do feel supported, but we need more help over here. We need more vehicles.
Well, look, incredible to chat to you. Really appreciate your time. I know you're a very, very busy man. Like I say, local government are helping, but this place is a DIY refugee centre. People from all over the UK, China, we've got America, all sorts of people coming here to help Ukrainians still as they flee the country, which is still being invaded by Russia for more than 2 weeks now. Incredible to see the support.
Indeed, what a man. Bradley, thank you very much indeed for joining us, Bradley, there on the Ukrainian-Polish border. We're clearly Poland going to incredible efforts to help out the, more than 1.5 million people who fled there from Ukraine. OK, we're going to pause on the briefing for the time being. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, an exclusive report from our Home Affairs and Security Editor Mark White on Putin's private army, the mercenary Wagner Group. You will not want to miss that. Really good report. As I say, coming up just after we bring you the latest news.
Thanks, Darren. It's 2:33. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Officials in the Ukrainian city of Mariupol say Russia is continuing its attacks, making it impossible for trapped civilians to leave. Yesterday, an airstrike on a maternity hospital in the city left 3 people dead, including a child, and at least 17 wounded. The Ukrainian president has called the attack a war crime. The Home Secretary says Ukrainian refugees with passports can now apply fully online to come to the UK. It's after the Ukrainian ambassador called on Britain to ditch the bureaucratic red tape. Priti Patel says security checks will still take place, but biometric data can be gathered once refugees reach the UK. Sports Minister Nadine Dorries says Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich must not benefit if the football club is sold. Mr. Abramovich has been added to the UK sanctions list for his links to Vladimir Putin. The government has issued an initial licence to Chelsea Football Club so it can continue to play its fixtures and fulfil its obligations for the rest of the season. US Vice President Kamala Harris has announced America will give another $50 million to Ukraine for humanitarian aid. Speaking alongside the Polish president in Warsaw, she also said America is prepared to defend every inch of NATO territory. In other news, a survey by Compare the Market suggests that 1/3 of families are struggling to pay their household bills. That as the average price of petrol nears a record £1.60 a litre. And NHS England says an all-time high of 6.1 million people are on waiting lists for routine hospital treatment. 1/4 of suspected cancer patients also fail to see a specialist within 2 weeks. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. It's back to the briefing with Darren McCaffrey in just a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
That you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Very welcome back to GB News. It is, 37 minutes past 2 o'clock on this Thursday afternoon. I am not Alex Phillips. You may have noticed she's on holiday. You got me for the next hour and a bit. And we're going to bring you an exclusive report now because defence and security analysts have told GB News that a Russian private military company, sanctioned by the West and linked to allegations of war crimes, is almost certainly on the ground and involved in fighting in Ukraine. This is the Wagner Group, which denies the Kremlin denies even exists. It's a secretive organisation made of more than 5,000, mainly former members of the Russian military. It's been reported the group may have been tasked with trying to assassinate key Ukrainian leaders, including its President Volodymyr Zelensky. Well, this is our report from Mark White, who examines the background to this very shadowy group that's been called Putin's private army.
A shadowy organisation gathering hard facts on the activities of the Wagner Group is far from easy. But they are, we've been told, active in Ukraine, likely involved in highly dubious activities. However, as Moscow doesn't even acknowledge their existence, Vladimir Putin has plausible deniability of whatever they're up to. The founder and leader of the group is a sinister, shaven-headed fellow by the name of Dmitry Utkin, a former senior officer in Russia's Spetsnaz Special Forces. Indeed, the Wagner name, we're told, is derived from his Spetsnaz code name, which apparently reflects his appreciation of the Third Reich and Hitler's favourite composer. Under Russian law, private military companies are illegal, publicly at least.
To call them a company would be a stretch, as there are no visible traces of this company existing. However, it has been deemed as an asset of plausible deniability by the Kremlin to be utilised for various different conflicts around the world. And they've been active not only in Central Africa, Venezuela, Syria, but also other parts of the world where it may be, again, for various reasons, not pragmatic for the Russian government to utilise their own state troops.
It was during deployments here in Syria and Central Africa several years ago that Wagner Group mercenaries were linked to allegations of war crimes, including torture, rape and murder. The wider group is now believed to be under the ownership of Yevgeny Prigozhin, a former criminal and billionaire restaurant owner nicknamed Putin Chef. He's one of a number of Russian elites facing Western sanctions. The West does, of course, also employ the services of private military contractors, groups like the US company Blackwater. Some of their employees were convicted and later pardoned in the killing of a number of Iraqi civilians in 2007. But Western contractors are at least regulated, and there's official oversight of their activities, unlike their Russian counterparts.
We've used private security companies to guard diplomats. We use them in Iraq, we the West that is, use them in Iraq, but mostly for non-military operations. The ones we're talking about here, that doesn't apply to. They're a different breed, if you like, and they're operating under different conditions. Whether they're accountable to the local military commanders on the ground or whether they're working back to some organisation in Moscow or elsewhere, I honestly don't know. But the reality is that in no way are they accountable in the same way that we in the West make our private companies accountable.
So are Wagner Group mercenaries now actively hunting Ukraine's leadership, including President Zelensky? Some with knowledge of their activities certainly believe so.
From what we understand in Ukraine right now, there is a kill team that are undertaking potential assassinations against key persons, including obviously Zelensky, that are very vocal in the charge for both morale for Ukrainian people, but also for the international community.
Whether their mission actually includes a leadership assassination command, defence and security analysts have told us they will certainly be involved in sabotage, false flag operations, and the likely interrogation and torture of captured Ukrainians, the kind of dirty jobs Vladimir Putin might want to publicly distance himself from.
And Mark joins us now live in the studio. Mark, I mean, first of all, this group is clearly quite effective to a degree. I mean, we've seen them play out in parts of Africa and the Middle East. What do we think the primary role is in Ukraine? Is it the assassination of Zelensky and others, or is it a part of a wider destabilisation plan?
Well, certainly that's the headline-grabbing tasking, if it were true, that they are a hit squad tasked with trying to take out President Zelensky and other high-profile figures. But I'm not convinced that that is their tasking. It might be, but they would be more suited to and generally involved in the kind of operations that are a bit down and dirty, that the Russian government don't necessarily want to be associated with, those kind of false flag operations, carrying out shelling or explosions or whatever it might be, and trying to blame the Ukrainian military for that, the kind of behind the enemy lines sabotage and reconnaissance, also the kind of capture and interrogation of Ukrainian individuals as well, members of the military or whoever it might be. They're a very unsavoury group, but they are very valuable, I think, as far as Vladimir Putin's particular private army is concerned, in terms of what they can do.
Yeah, I used that term just beforehand. I mean, is that fair to say that that's essentially what they kind of are?
Yeah, I mean, people have variously described them as a company, but they're not a company, really. They don't exist in those terms. They're very difficult to actually track down to any kind of entity that you could say, yeah, look at that, that's a listed public company or whatever. You've got this man, Yevgeny Prigozhin, who is a billionaire who's now taken wider ownership of this loosely termed group. He is someone who's made much of his money from being very close to Vladimir Putin. He's been given a huge multi-billion dollar or ruble contract to supply the Russian military in catering terms. He is a chef. He's often seen in his own kitchen in his high-end restaurant cooking up specials for some of the VIP guests that are out there. But as I say, this group as such, it's there, it does the jobs that the Russian military as such wouldn't necessarily be involved in. We think it numbers about 5,000 or so now. It's been involved in operations in Syria, in Central Africa, in South America, and has been linked to some very unsavoury incidents, to the extent where the European Union and others have slapped sanctions on them.
And just very finally, you talked about false flag situations there. We've heard from the Americans and from the Brits in the last 24 hours about this idea of chemical or biological weapons being used in Syria. We've seen it, in Ukraine. We've seen it in Syria. What do you make of those reports?
Well, that is very, very concerning, of course, because clearly there is significant evidence pointing to their use by Assad's forces with a Russian finger in there too. So this group would, I would imagine, be, very well suited to that kind of operation, should that be given the green light by Vladimir Putin. And of course, the difficulty for the Russians is the more they get fierce resistance from the Ukrainians, and they have been with the assistance of Western supplied anti-tank and anti-air missiles, for instance, that makes it more likely, yes, that Vladimir Putin will resort to the kind of weapons. We've also heard about these thermobaric weapons that are very, very nasty indeed, that suck all of the oxygen out of the local environments in order to fuel a bigger blast. And they are used often against dugout entrenchments and the like. So, as you say, the more desperate he gets, the more potential there is for the use of these weapons. And the Wagner Group may well be at the vanguard of operating these weapons if they are given the green light.
OK, Mark, thank you very much indeed. Mark White there, our Home Affairs and Security Editor, with his analysis on the Wagner Group. And you can get more of that online. You can rewatch Mark's report if you want on our YouTube channel. And a bit later on in the programme, in fact, in less than an hour's time, we're speaking to a former British colonel about the military situation, about what is happening on the ground in Ukraine. How well are the Russians advancing? Have they been bogged down? We'll get all the details on that. You won't want to miss that, as I say, in less than an hour's time. But let's head now to Ukraine and get the latest from Kharkiv, a city, of course, which has been under very heavy Russian attack. It's the second largest city in Ukraine. And Maria Avadkiva joins us now down the line. Maria, very good afternoon to you. Thank you for joining us here on GB News. Clearly, Kharkiv has been under incredible military assault over the last week or so. What is the situation like in the city?
Well, good afternoon. The city is under constant shellings from Russia, and they usually start in the evening and go out through the night. And then in the next morning, we will read threatening reports from all around the city about the destroyment and the destruction being made by Russian missiles. And the latest report was that this very night, 27 strikes by Russian missiles was made on Kharkiv. And what is more important, they are striking deliberately residential areas. So the areas where people live, the gas pipeline was broken. It means that the 1/3 of the population here is now without the gas heating, and the city is on the verge of the humanitarian crisis because people are staying in this cold, very freezing temperatures outside, are staying without heating, without water supply, electricity supply, and this is really hard for people simply to survive here.
And just in terms of those supplies, is medicine, is food, is water managing to get into the city? How desperate are things getting?
Yes, the Russian troops are now situated on the north and northeast of the city. It means that the other parts can be reached and also by cars. It is still very dangerous because when you are in the car or someone is driving and bringing here humanitarian aid, then even this car can become an easy target for Russian attack or missile because there is no green corridor where people can freely move. But that means that nevertheless, Ukrainians are taking this risk, and there are many volunteers bringing humanitarian help and supplying people in Kharkiv with food. So it is not, the situation is not critical in terms that there is no food at all. But then, of course, the supplies are very limited, and especially people with children, elderly people, those who are stuck somewhere in their basements or in shelters and cannot go out and go out to the shop, that they are in the very critical situation.
And what about the resistance, Maria? How is that holding up? We know the army are fighting back. Are locals doing the same?
fighting back fiercely, and actually Ukrainian military are managing to counter-attack Russian troops, pushing them back to closer to the Russian border. And we already have some towns outside of Kharkiv that were previously controlled by Russian troops. They are now under full control of Ukraine, and that gives us great hope that Ukraine will succeed here in this on-the-ground operation. But that makes Putin and his commanders furious, and they destroy the residential areas, continuing bombardment the city from the sky, and using these rockets and airstrikes, and that of course is really dangerous, and that's why Ukraine is asking for any kind of help that could be given to Ukraine in terms of air defense, in terms of air jets, and close the sky above Ukraine or on some areas of Ukraine, because that is for now where is the most threat going on.
Okay, Maria, thank you so much for joining us. Stay safe. Thank you for that. That's Maria Avadiva, who is the research director at the European Expert Association, joining us from inside Kharkiv, a city that has been shelled relentlessly over the last couple of days. Do get in touch, by the way, GBviews at GBnews.uk. We're going to get to some of those a little later on in the programme, or indeed you can tweet me at GBnews. Now, you may have seen it on the back of the programme, or the bottom of the screen, I should say. In a couple of minutes, we're going to move away from Ukraine. Talk about Ian Blackford, the SNP leader of Westminster. Is he about to say goodbye to Westminster? Infighting inside the SNP will be in Scotland in just a couple of minutes.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows. Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Very welcome back to GB News. It is 6 minutes to 3 o'clock on this Thursday afternoon. Now we're going to turn our attention to Scotland, where yesterday the First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said that NATO should not rule out a no-fly zone being imposed in Ukraine. It struck a very different tone, of course, from the Prime Minister Boris Johnson and political leaders elsewhere in Western Europe. Also, some other news coming out of Scotland today are reports suggesting that the SNP Westminster leader, Ian Blackford, may be poised to step down from the role amid infighting inside the SNP. Well, joining me to discuss all of this is a Scottish Conservative MSP, Murdo Fraser. Murdo, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just first of all, is there a difference in terms of the view from Scotland when it comes to no-fly zones? Are you on the same page, for example, as Nicola Sturgeon is?
No, I'm not, and I'm not sure anybody seriously is.
I mean, there's a major difference between doing what the UK has been doing, training Ukraine military, supplying them with weaponry. In my own constituency in Fife, the company Raytheon produces the Javelin anti-tank missile that's being supplied to Ukraine, and that's absolutely correct. But what Nicola Sturgeon was suggesting was something deeply irresponsible. She was suggesting that NATO should consider implementing a no-fly zone. And what that would do, of course, is bring UK and other NATO troops and planes directly into conflict with Russia, which would be a major escalation and might well precipitate the effectively World War III. So it's a very irresponsible statement to make. It raises expectations that this might be about to happen and undermines the very considered approach being taken by the NATO leadership, by the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, the US President Joe Biden, and other European leaders who understand the calls for this to happen. It has to be very clear that the downsides to this, which could precipitate much more extensive conflict in Europe, far outweigh the advantages.
Let's move on to Ian Blackford. Lots of rumours today suggesting he's had enough of leading at Westminster. What have you heard?
Well, this was a story broken overnight by the news agency Politico, and it seems to have been well sourced. Clearly, they've spoken to a number of people within the SNP, both at Westminster and at Holyrood, expressing concern about Ian Blackford's behaviour, suggesting he himself is not happy in the role. And it comes on the back of what's been a really difficult period for the SNP Westminster leader, with two quite significant gaffes that he's made. About a month ago, he made a claim about the payment of pensions in independent Scotland, which I remember your channel covering at the time, suggesting that in the event of independence, the taxpayers of England and Wales and Northern Ireland would continue to pay the pensions of people in Scotland. Now, that's a claim that was widely ridiculed. It was a claim that was out of step with what the SNP had said before. Initially, Nicola Sturgeon, when I asked her about it at Holyrood, seemed to back him, but then later U-turned and said that wouldn't be the policy. But clearly the SNP leadership at Holyrood have not been happy, were not happy with Ian Blackford opening up that whole area of debate, which left them looking very exposed. And then we had another incident just at the weekend when being asked about the prospects for another independence referendum, Ian Blackford said that looked like being on the back burner for now. And yesterday, Nicola Sturgeon came out and slapped him down and said, oh, no, there were still plans for a referendum in 2023.
And yet, Murdo, despite all of that, John Curtis, who I'm sure you know well, says that looking at the current polls, if there was an election tomorrow, the SNP might well take all the seats, wiping out you guys.
Well, that may be the case. And of course, opinion polls come and go. We are still, of course, dealing with the fallout from the Partygate saga. And that undoubtedly had an impact on people's view of the Conservative Party, both in Scotland and in other parts of the country. I think when people get back to focusing on the SNP's domestic agenda, I think they'll start to come to very different conclusions.
OK, Murdo Fraser, as always, thank you very much indeed for joining us there. That's Murdo Fraser for the Conservative Party.
Thank you, Darren.
From Holyrood in Scotland. Lots of you getting in touch. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Matthew says that the atrocities committed by Russia are evil and unforgivable. The support China offers will in no doubt be noted and never forgotten by the rest of the world too. However, very sad as it all is, Ukraine has already fallen when the Russian troops stepped over the fence. This will become yet another South Yemen or Afghanistan or Iraq or indeed another Syria. And Jeff says on terms of supporting people during these difficult times of the cost of living crisis, says the government should take back around 170 quid per month from my state pension. That is the lower amount because I planned for my future when I did work. My occupational pension and state pension combined should just be below the minimum wage, and that more should be done essentially to support working age people in these difficult months. Do get in touch. GBViews at gbnews.uk. OK, well, that is it for this hour. Don't forget, though, the briefing is continuing in the next hour between 3 and 4. We'll have the very latest on the situation in Ukraine. But it is coming up to 3 o'clock. You're watching GB News and the briefing with me, Darren McCaffrey. Yeah, very good afternoon. Welcome to the programme. Coming up over the next hour between 3 and 4 o'clock, we're going to get the latest on the situation in Ukraine and discuss all the domestic news with Conservative MPs, Colonel Bob Stewart, and Labour's Catherine West. Also, as Russian Defence Ministry admits that vacuum bombs are being used in Ukraine, we'll get the latest on some of the weapons being used by the Kremlin and also what the latest military situation is on the ground with a former British military commander. Plus, the EU is hosting a leader summit in Versailles. We'll speak to the EU's external affairs spokesperson on Europe's response so far to the Ukraine crisis. That and so much more in the next hour between 3 and 4. But first, at the top of the hour is Rhiannon with the very latest news.
Thanks, Darren. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 3. Here are your top stories from the GB newsroom. Officials in the Ukrainian city of Mariupol say Russia is continuing its attacks, making it impossible for trapped civilians to leave. The Ukrainian military has released this video, which it says shows the aftermath of an assault on a residential area in the city. 400,000 people have been without power or water for more than a week, and several attempts to set up a humanitarian corridor have failed. Yesterday, an airstrike on a maternity hospital in the city left 3 people dead, including a child, and at least 17 wounded. The Ukrainian president has called the attack a war crime and says Russia is deliberately preventing civilians from leaving.
Russian troops have already created a humanitarian catastrophe in Ukraine, but it is only a part of their plan. They want to humiliate our people and make them kneel to take water and food from the occupants' hands, so that Ukrainians will be able to save their lives by only going to the occupied territories or Russia. That's why they are blocking Mariupol.
Volodymyr Zelensky there. Damien was studying in the northeastern city of Sumy when Russia's invasion of Ukraine started. He told GB News he was living in fear before he fled to Hungary.
Every night we go to bomb shelters. That's where we sleep. That's where we. Bomb shelters. It's in the cold. There is no heater there. The electricity went out. They actually bombed out a power plant. So the electricity was going off and on. The water supply was dirty. So if you didn't have any water stored up, you just have to drink it. No other options. The food was running out. The whole thing was just we're just living in fear.
Well, the Home Secretary says Ukrainian refugees with passports can now apply fully online to come to the UK. It means application centres in Europe can focus on helping those who don't have passports. It's after the Ukrainian ambassador to the UK called on Britain to ditch the bureaucratic red tape. Priti Patel told the Commons she's streamlining the approach to those fleeing the conflict.
From Tuesday, I can announce that Ukrainians with passports will no longer need to go to a visa application centre to give their biometrics before they come to the UK. Instead, once their application has been considered and appropriate checks completed, they will receive direct notification that they are eligible for the scheme and can come to the UK. In short, Ukrainians with passports will be able to get permission to come here fully online from wherever they are and will be able to give their biometrics once in Britain.
Priti Patel speaking earlier. US Vice President Kamala Harris has announced America will give another $50 million to Ukraine in humanitarian aid. Speaking alongside the Polish president in Warsaw, she also said America's delivered Patriot missile systems to Poland, which can track and intercept ballistic missiles. Vice President Harris added that America is prepared to defend every inch of NATO territory. The Prime Minister says soldiers who go absent without leave to fight in Ukraine will face a court-martial when they return to the UK. Boris Johnson says despite the clear distinction between good and evil in the conflict, no one should be going to fight. It's after the British Army announced a small number of soldiers have disobeyed orders and gone AWOL. There are fears they may have travelled to Ukraine to fight Russian troops. Sports Minister Nadine Dorries says Roman Abramovich must not benefit if Chelsea Football Club is sold. Mr. Abramovich was added to the UK sanctions list today. Described as a pro-Kremlin oligarch, the Chelsea owner has been hit with an asset freeze and a travel ban. The government has issued an initial licence to enable Chelsea Football Club to continue playing its fixtures and fulfilling its obligations for the rest of the season. Labour's calling on the government to ramp up its production of green power. That's amid rising global energy prices. A survey by the Compare the Markets suggests a third of families are struggling to pay their household bills. It's as the average price of petrol nears a record £1.60 a litre. The government says it'll unveil its energy supply strategy in the coming days. That's after committing to phase out Russian oil imports by the end of the year. And NHS England says a record 6.1 million people are on waiting lists for routine hospital treatments. Over 300,000 patients have been waiting more than a year, and a quarter of suspected cancer patients failed to see a specialist within 2 weeks. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to the briefing with Darren McCaffrey.
Very good afternoon. Welcome to the programme. It is 6 minutes past 3 o'clock. We're on TV, online and on your DAB digital radio. Thank you very much indeed for your company. GB Views at GBNews.uk, or indeed tweet us at GB News, particularly about the situation in Ukraine, about the sanctioning of Roman Abramovich, and also your concerns when it comes to the cost of living. We're going to be covering that all in the next hour between 3 and 4. Do get in touch, and we'll get to some of those views a little later on in the programme. But first of all, let's focus on what's been happening in Ukraine, because the Russian Foreign Minister has stated that the Western outcry over the Mariupol maternity hospital bombing, which we saw yesterday, leading to the deaths of several people, he's branded as pathetic. It comes as the British government announced those new sanctions against Roman Abramovich and some other Russian oligarchs, and also a change today from the Home Secretary in regards to visa programme to enter Britain for Ukrainian refugees. The Home Secretary announcing that you will be able to do it electronically from next Tuesday. It follows a massive outcry, doesn't it, from many MPs and indeed from the public, that the government should be doing more to allow the millions of Ukrainians who are leaving Ukraine. In fact, the mayor today of Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, suggested up to 2 million people had fled that city. That would be half of the city's entire population. Well, let's speak to the Labour MP for Hornsey and Wood Green. That is Catherine West. Catherine, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just first of all, if we can focus on the sanctions against Roman Abramovich, the former, I think it's fair to say now, Chelsea owner. Well, he's the current Chelsea owner. He's trying to get rid of it, that will no longer be allowed under the new sanctions. Are these sanctions that you welcome?
Well, what took them so long? The Russia report came out 2 years ago, and they've taken all this time to get round to actually doing anything about it. What concerns me, though, is that this shouldn't affect fans or ticket holders or anybody else who loves their own football club. I don't think it's their fault, but I do think the government took an awfully long time to get round to actually doing anything about this great conspicuous consumption of wealth, which many of us had problems with and for many years, but which was underlined by the Russia report, which came out in 2020 and which the government has signally failed to do anything about, except in the last 10 days.
In many regards, though, I mean, up until recently, there weren't many calls, whether from within the Labour Party, for the government to be taking action on this. I mean, the government's clearly reacting to events, aren't they?
We've been calling for 2 years for the government to take reasonable action against what was called in the Intelligence and Security Committee, which was given to Parliament 2 years ago, the London laundromat. And we have known that people who have connections with the Kremlin, for example, Mr. Abramovich, or for example, Mr. Johnson's friend who's in the House of Lords, whose father was the head of the KGB, or donors who have given money to the Tory party who used to be politicians in Russia. There are a number of people who are connected to the Kremlin who have very strong links to the Tory party. And we have been calling for a follow-up to the Russia report for action, and yet the government has dragged its feet. It's only now in the last 10 days that they've suddenly decided to do this rather panicked measure when they could have done it properly, with proper legislation and rules around the way these things are done, to give fans and to give supporters a sense that this isn't just going to be in free fall now.
But I don't know why you're turning this into a party political matter, in the sense there's no evidence that there's been undue influence on the Conservative Party, that essentially, or there's any evidence the Conservative Party's done anything wrong. They've accepted money from legitimate sources. This is about war in Ukraine and about what Britain does to sanction oligarchs. Why are you making this a party political point?
2 years ago, our own Parliament, the UK Parliament, produced a report, and the findings were that London is considered to be a laundromat for dirty money from Russia, particularly those companies which are connected with the Kremlin. Because of the system of their economy, every single very large company, particularly energy companies, which Gazprom obviously is a major element of the Chelsea Football Club, that there were money laundering problems, and the government was warned. That's 2 years ago now. They took ages to bring that report out. They finally brought it out, and we have been calling, I know because I've been the Shadow Minister and it's on the record on Hansard, we have been calling for them to get moving and to begin a sanctions program, and instead they're rushing into it, as they always do, as you see with Ms Patel today, rushing into it because she's been forced back to the dispatch box to do something about it. The government has got no program and no strategy. It only lurches from crisis to crisis. And while I welcome this measure, I think it's well overdue, and it should be done in a systematic and proper way with adequate consultation, not in a panicked measure in the way that this is being done.
You mentioned the Home Secretary's efforts today to improve what's been, frankly, a bit of a mess when it comes to the system of allowing Ukrainian refugees into Britain. As you rightly pointed out, you welcome those changes. But in essence, I mean, do you think the Home Secretary should be going further on all of this? Because as far as I understand it, Labour are still in favour of us having a visa system in place.
We do need to have checks for who comes into the country. However, Ms Patel has been dragged to the House of Commons 3 times this week, or her ministers, and the Home Office needs to get a grip. I have seen a disgraceful photograph of a table with chairs empty at Calais, where people are obviously desperate to be reunited with family members. And I do welcome the arrangement now that more can be done online, and that people who have Ukrainian passports, which is a form of identity, can match that. But we have to understand that some people will not have their identity cards because their houses have been blown to smithereens by the Russians. So we do need to have a policy which does accept that in a situation of war, some people will not have the correct documentation, because that is what wars do. They do blow up your house, and sometimes your passport or your ID cards do get blown up with that as well. So I hope the Home Office can get its act together. It can match at least Ireland. Ireland is a smaller country. It has a small population, and yet it's taken, about 100,000 individuals in desperate need. Whereas I think the UK is, maybe it's up to 1,000 yet. I'm not sure. You probably have the more up-to-date figures, but when I last looked, it was about 300. So this is just unacceptable for Great Britain to be making this error and not to be implementing an effective, quick passage to give families safety, especially those women with very small children, which must be a desperately stressful situation.
Well, just on the figures, I think the Irish Justice Minister yesterday, this is of yesterday, said 2,500 refugees had arrived in Ireland, more expected yesterday afternoon. The Prime Minister in the comments said it was just over 1,000 in the UK, but your point is valid in the sense, of course, Ireland is only about 10 times smaller than the UK. We're going to have to leave it there, though, Catherine. Thank you so much indeed for joining us, Catherine West.
And thank you for correcting my facts.
You invited me to do so, so that's the reason why. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you. I'll have them to hand next time. All the best.
Indeed. Thanks a lot, Catherine West there from the Labour Party. Let's go to Christine Jardine. She is the Liberal Democrat MP, and she joins us now from Edinburgh. Christine, thanks very much indeed for joining us. We heard from your leader, didn't we, Sir Ed Davey, very impassionate in the Commons yesterday about this refugee situation. Now, clearly the Home Secretary has made improvements this morning. What I want to get at here, though, is that this seems to be incompetence inside the Home Office rather than any sense of inhumanity, isn't it? Because the government's made it clear that they are open, very open, with uncapped numbers of Ukrainian refugees. It's just the system's not been working.
Well, the government, we're getting one story one day and a different story another day, and it's incompetence and it's security reasons. And the basic thing is they haven't done enough quickly enough. They haven't acted quickly enough. They haven't acted on the sanctions quickly enough. Today, we hear Roman Abramovich is to be sanctioned and Chelsea Football Club can't be sold. But, this has been going on for 2 years. And it's ridiculous that it's taken so long. And what we need to do is get the refugees here. I think the British people want to get as many people out of Ukraine as we possibly can, to welcome as many of them, those who have family here, who have friends here, who we can support and help in what is a dreadful situation. And as Catherine pointed out, to ask people, to be looking for proof of identity when your house has been bombed and you have to flee, sometimes in the middle of the night, with what you can carry or get in your car, it's not always possible to bring what the authorities are going to be looking for right away. We should be making sure people are safe, children are safe, have somewhere to sleep before we start asking too many, before we start working on who they are.
Sorry, Christine, but isn't that the point, though, what the government would say is that also their primary aim is the British government is to protect British people, and that is why they need these security checks, even in the most awful of circumstances?
Nobody is denying for a minute that the government's prime responsibility is not to the British people. But what we have is an emergency. And what they have done is taken far too long to actually react and to take the steps that have been necessary to protect, all of us from the threat from Putin's desire to extend his reach through influence and money, and now we see the results of it in Ukraine, the ultimate expression of power hungry, and it's appalling what we are seeing on a daily basis, and the government have just, as in so much over the past 2 years, dithered and delayed and taken too long to act. And it's time now that they did. And what we would like to see is them taking some of these oligarchs' mansions, these huge mansions, and using them to put up Ukrainian refugees who have basically had to flee their homes with what they stand up in and what they can carry because of Putin's aggression.
And that is fine, and we know it's obviously up to the opposition to question and to criticise the government, but is there a sense here that opposition parties are going too far in that the British government has been on the lead on many of these international sanctions, like, for example, SWIFT, which has been thus far quite effective, on things like arming Ukrainians? Britain was doing that ahead of other European nations. Isn't that something that the government should be praised for?
We are all trying to work together to stand with the people of Ukraine, support the people of Ukraine, ensure that the people of Ukraine are helped as much as they possibly can be in this. But that doesn't mean that if we think the government is not acting quickly enough, we should stand back and say, well, no, just take your time, it's fine. Look at what other countries are doing. Look at what Ireland has done. Ireland yesterday had, more than twice as many people, taking twice as many refugees as we have. Look at Poland and Hungary. And it's immigration is something that this government has never got to grips with. And now we're seeing that this situation is not about immigration. It's about refugees, but they don't seem to be able to handle it. And we're not saying that they shouldn't be doing what they're doing in other areas. What we're saying in this is please, 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 can you act more quickly?
Okay, Christine, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I thought I almost heard a dog rustling in the background. I was hoping...
You did.
I thought we might get a chance to see him or her, but clearly not.
Okay, give me a second. Give me a day.
Well, even in these dark times, I think we need some cheering up. Oh, look at that. Look at that little cutie. What's her name?
Sorry?
Thank you. Well, big love to her. Thank you very much indeed. Christine Chartine there joined us from Edinburgh. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
OK, you're watching GB News. Lots of you have been getting in touch, actually. Evan says they give these oligarchs too much advance notice to move their assets. David says, again, we've got a collective amnesia of history. We need to stand up to bullies, man up Biden and give Putin 48 hours to cease fire and stop withdrawing, or we will be in a state of war. And Marianne, this is on the SNP, says that Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP should learn a valuable lesson from what has happened in Ukraine. They seem to want independence at any cost. If anything, the current situation should make them think about whether diversity is the best option. It's clearly not. We are better together. Do get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at gbnews. As you can see, we'll take a quick break. Coming up next, we are going to be talking about energy costs, what it means for you, what the government could be doing in the next couple of weeks as bills go through the roof. But before all of that, let's bring you up to date with the weather on this Thursday afternoon. Let's go to the Met Office. Diamond Exeter.
Hello, a good deal of cloud around through the rest of this afternoon and in fact the next few days and into the weekend. There will be occasional brighter spells and it will be generally on the breezy side. Now, what we've got at the moment is high pressure across the continent, and that's blocking these weather fronts from making much progress. So the setup is fairly stationary. This weather front with us at the moment bringing a lot of cloud across the country through this afternoon into the evening, and in fact little change overnight. A southerly flow of air feeding some quite mild air in our direction, and again that's the case right the way through the next few days. So we start Friday on a rather cloudy note, but a fairly mild one, quite breezy conditions, and that will be the case through much of the day on Friday as well. So a good deal of cloud around, some outbreaks of generally fairly light rain and drizzle at first, but then this second area of low pressure develops to the southwest of the country, and that will gradually make its way northwards through the course of the day, bringing some more persistent rain for a time. And then as that starts to clear, turning more showery from the southwest. But it's another fairly mild day, temperatures above where they would normally be at this time of year, although it will be quite a windy day for just about all of us. Now, as we head through Friday evening, these showers will continue. Some really quite heavy downpours are possible at times, but there will be some clearer spells around as well. And those showers stay with us right the way through the night and into the start of Saturday. So with quite a lot of cloud around and that warm southerly flow, it will once again be a fairly mild night. So we start the weekend with some showery outbreaks of rain, possible just about anywhere. We will start to see those showers fading away from the south for a time ahead of this next area of low pressure, which pushes in for the weekend. So all in all, the weekend is looking fairly cloudy on the breezy side, but remaining fairly mild.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
Right here on YouTube. You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and every weekday we bring you The Briefing live from 9:30 a.m. The stories, analysis, and live debate that you need to hear.
Quite right, Tom, of course.
Was this something that had been considered at all?
Difficult to answer.
Gas-guzzling helicopters circling. Noise is being made here.
Joe Biden walking out.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, Monday to Friday, 9:30 a.m. on GB News.
Join me, Gloria De Piero, Monday to Thursday at noon for The Briefing. We go to the parts of Parliament that you won't see elsewhere. Plus, there's exclusive interviews with MPs from all parties.
But quite often, they paper over the real truth. Why does a working class lad like you join the Tories?
That's a good question.
Don't miss it, Monday to Thursdays at noon on GB News.
Good afternoon, 26 minutes past 3 o'clock. Now, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has, of course, started a movement across the West to wean ourselves of Russian oil and gas. The United States and Britain have already committed to a ban on Russian oil by the end of this year, the EU announcing a plan to end reliance on Russian energy as well. However, redressing our energy relationship will clearly affect us rather adversely here at home. Well, joining me now is James Waddell. He is the head of European Gas and Energy Aspects. James, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just give us a sense at the moment of where we're at in terms of our energy reliance on Russia, particularly when it comes to oil and gas, because we're not quite as exposed as many of our European neighbours.
In the UK, we're not as exposed, but we are obviously linked to the European market and the global market for both oil and gas. So this will affect what happens in terms of UK retail and wholesale prices, whatever happens in terms of.
Oh, and looks that we may well just have lost James. He was talking to us there, wasn't he, about what was happening in terms of the energy supply. Let's go, I think, back to James now. He is still with, there you go, James. It's as if someone's turned off the electricity on ourselves. Just talk us through again what you're saying when it comes to energy. I get your point that we're not as reliant directly, but because gas prices are set across the board means that we are still pretty exposed. Is that right?
Exactly. We can't separate our prices in the UK from prices that are happening in Europe and in the rest of the world. So any major disruption in Russian energy flows towards Europe would have a very direct effect on what happens in the UK.
And what about oil?
So in terms of our oil reliance, we're in Europe, we're about between 30 and 40% reliant in terms of diesel, similar percentage in terms of gas, similar percentage. We import a lot of ammonia from Russia, and we import a lot of coal from Russia. So across the board, there's a massive energy codependence with Russia.
And where, I say where, I mean, where are we going to find these new supplies from? Because it's clear that there's now going to be a very deliberate attempt to wean ourselves off Russian energy. Where are the UK government and companies going to find these different supplies from?
Well, this is the major problem. And when looking at proposals put forward by the IEA and put forward by the European Commission on how we reduce our reliance on Russian energy, frankly, a lot of these plans look pretty far-fetched in terms of sourcing new supply from other directions. We have been in a system for the last few months, much of the end of last year, where prices globally have been extremely high. So anyone who's on the buy side has already reduced their demand as much as possible, and anyone on the supply side who can deliver more gas into the global system has been ramping up their export plants as much as possible. There's no extra give in the global system to give a lot more LNG or gas to Europe or other commodities like oil to Europe. So if we were to get a full-scale reduction in Russian exports, it would be extremely difficult to replace on the supply side. And what we're really talking about is how to manage a reduction in European demand for energy in total. And that, as we've seen over recent years, takes a lot of time to implement. We can build out more renewables, but this is not something that we can do overnight. And if we'd taken the signals back in 2014, after that first wave of European policymaking talking about reducing Russian supply, maybe that could have been effected over the last 8 years, but trying to do this all in 1 year is extremely difficult.
And what does this mean for all of us in terms of this uncertainty, frankly, and this change for us consumers? I mean, how bad is this likely to get for all of us?
Well, one of the interesting things with the proposal to cut Russian oil and actually implementing that is what we've signaled in the US and in the UK is that energy sanctions are on the table. And this has created a huge amount of uncertainty globally, where a lot of firms are now self-sanctioning, or they're not able to get trade finance to actually buy Russian commodities. And this is driving up prices at the global level. And this is, of course, having an impact in terms of wholesale prices within Europe. Now, if you add to that the fact that we've now taken the gloves off and saying this is on the table, we are willing to sanction Russian oil and gas, well, Russia has said, well, we may stop delivering you Russian gas through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, for example. And this is again creating that uncertainty. And if this was to be put into effect, and we were to get an actual big reduction in Russian gas into the European market, gas prices would skyrocket from already extremely high levels. I'm talking about prices that are already 5 to 10 times higher than they've ever been before, and to go up further still. And then we'd be on a sort of situation where we'd be having to mandate industrial closures in order to stop prices from skyrocketing even higher, because of course this is going to affect household retail bills. And people are already grappling with energy poverty in the UK and in parts of Europe. And without massive state subsidies to the vulnerable customers, people are going to be really struggling to pay their bills.
OK, James, really appreciate your time and your analysis this afternoon. That's James Waddell, who is the head of European Gas at Energy Aspects. Thanks, James. OK, you're watching GB News. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, as Russia admits it's using lung-busting vacuum bombs. We'll be speaking to a military expert about how they work, how much damage they're doing, and what is the military situation in Ukraine. We keep hearing that Russian forces are bogged down, but are they? Are they making advances elsewhere in the country? That and so much more in the next 30 minutes. But first, let's bring you up to date with the latest news at just after 3:30.
It's 3:32. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Officials in the Ukrainian city of Mariupol say Russia is continuing its attacks, making it impossible for trapped civilians to leave. Yesterday, an airstrike on a maternity hospital in the city left 3 people dead, including a child, and at least 17 wounded. The Ukrainian president has called the attack a war crime. The Home Secretary says Ukrainian refugees with passports can now apply fully online to come to the UK. It's after the Ukrainian ambassador called on Britain to ditch the bureaucratic red tape. Priti Patel says security checks will still take place, but biometric data can be gathered once refugees reach the UK. Sports Minister Nadine Dorries says Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich must not benefit if the football club is sold. Mr Abramovich has been added to the UK sanctions list for his links to Vladimir Putin. The government's issued an initial licence to Chelsea Football Club so it can continue to play its fixtures and fulfil its obligations for the rest of the season. US Vice President Kamala Harris has announced America will give another $50 million to Ukraine for humanitarian aid. Speaking alongside the Polish president in Warsaw, she also said America is prepared to defend every inch of NATO territory. In other news, a survey by Compare the Market suggests that 1/3 of families are struggling to pay their household bills. That as the average price of petrol nears a record £1.60 a litre. And NHS England says an all-time high of 6.1 million people are on waiting lists for routine hospital treatment. A quarter of suspected cancer patients also failed to see a specialist within 2 weeks. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. It's back to the briefing with Darren McCaffrey in just a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows. Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon. You're watching GB News, The Briefing with me, Darren McCaffrey. We're on TV, online and on your DAB digital radio. It is 23 minutes to 4 o'clock on this Thursday afternoon. Thank you for your company. Now, among many shocking moments, maybe one of the most astonishing ones of this conflict so far in Ukraine came last night when Russia's defence ministry admitted that it is using lung-busting thermobaric vacuum bombs. This all comes as Western intelligence services say they are warning that Russia could be poised to use chemical weapons in this conflict too. Well, joining me now from source we discuss all of this is Hamish de Breton-Gordon. He is a former army colonel and an expert on chemical warfare. Thank you so much indeed again for joining us, Hamish. Let's start first of all with the use of these vacuum bombs. They are deadly lethal, aren't they?
They're pretty horrific. They were originally developed by the Americans to destroy minefields. And in fact, in the first Gulf War, when I was a young tank commander, they blew them up in front of us before we went into Kuwait to liberate Kuwait. They are completely indiscriminate, create a massive explosion, a massive shockwave, and used in towns and cities, absolutely devastating, and no doubt create loads of civilian casualties. So we know that Russia is using them now, and I think it's part of the escalation, really. We're now talking about chemical and biological weapons as well as nuclear weapons. So where he goes next will be something that we need to work out.
And just in regards to that desperation, if we can just focus on the situation on the ground, we've been talking for a long time, haven't we, about that military convoy outside Kyiv, the capital, that in some respects now seems to be on retreat, according to some videos I've seen, where it seems to have come under attack from the Ukrainians. Not much progress there, but there is some progress being made by the Russians in the south, is that right?
Well, that's I'm reading it pretty much the same as you. I think generally the Russian military on the ground have performed very poorly, or a lot worse than we thought. We were led to believe that they were well trained from all the videos we saw from Belarus, and that their equipment had been revamped. But it would appear that although they've got some excellent tanks, they don't seem to be very well maintained. The logistics, and they always say tactics is for amateurs, logistics is for professionals. They seem to be missing out that. They've got plenty of tanks, but presumably they haven't got enough fuel tankers to keep these things topped up. And there are also stories about people starving, not having enough food. So generally, conventionally, they are performing badly. They've had a few gains in the south, as you said, but that 40-mile convoy, which is very vulnerable, being picked off all the time. And actually, when you get into towns and cities, tanks are very susceptible. And all those anti-tank missiles that we gave to the Ukrainians before it started and we're now giving is having a real impact. The Russian tanks in particular are taking quite a hammering from the Ukrainians.
Yeah, just talk us through some of those weapons, because it's not just, isn't it, these, I'm going to say Stinger missiles, I think I'm right in referring to, among other things being supplied by Britain, but we've got drones from Turkey and, you know, armour from elsewhere in Europe. I mean, there is an awful lot of weapons now flooding into Ukraine for their military to use.
Well, that's right. And it would appear that the Stingers, which are anti-aircraft missiles, and other anti-aircraft missiles are having a huge effect. We thought the Russians would have air superiority by now, and they certainly don't have that. So they are being affected by those ground-to-air missiles, as well as the Ukrainian Air Force, who are doing a good job. The anti-tank weapons, particularly the Javelin missiles that come from the UK, are again proving hugely effective. I'm very surprised that a lot of the Russian tanks and armour doesn't have what we call up armour on it. British tanks have things called bar armour and explosive armour to make them less susceptible to these sort of weapons. So it's almost as though the Russians have gone into this slightly half-cocked with their, without the full protection one would expect, which is a surprise. I think Putin has just underestimated, number one, the resolve of the Ukraine people, and number two, the fact that the international community has come together to oppose him. And I think it enters a dangerous phase, because if Putin is realizing that he is not going to roll up Ukraine as he had hoped, that's when he might go to less conventional weapons like biological weapons, but probably more likely chemical weapons, and God forbid, nuclear.
And let's focus on that, if we can, Hamish, for a moment, in the sense that we've heard very deliberately from the United States and British intelligence services in the last 24 hours or so about these kind of false flag moments, which Russia would then use to deploy things like chemical warfare. Just talk us through what a false flag event is, and as you say, that concern that might be an attempt to ratchet things up.
Well, false flag it's sort of, as it says on the tin, this is something very favoured by the Russians and the Syrians in Syria. They claim the opposition are about to use chemical weapons, which they think gives them an excuse to use them themselves. So I think the US government last night said that they had evidence that the Russians were preparing chemical and biological false flag attacks in Ukraine, which, if they use the Syrian playbook that they seem to be in every other way they're operating in Ukraine, one could anticipate they themselves actually using these weapons and blaming it on the Ukrainian military. So that's and the other thing I think that is really important is that Russians have seen how successful chemical weapons are in Syria. There was the 4-year conventional siege of Aleppo using similar tactics and weapons to what we're seeing at the moment. But that took 4 years, and the Russians and Syrians got nowhere. 13 days of chemical attack using chlorine broke the siege, and the Syrians and the Russians won. If Russia wants to avoid a protracted battle in places like Kiev, they might decide to go for the chemical option. And of course, let's not also forget that Obama's red line on chemical weapons disappeared in smoke in August 2013, when Assad used sarin and killed 1,500 people. And first of all, the British government and then the American government decided not to punish him. I think we are reaping that weakness now. And I think we've got to get on the front foot and start showing how we're really serious, we are going to act, and to get Putin on the back foot.
And just very finally, before we let you go, Hamish, just in terms of Russian morale in all of this, I mean, again, as desperate as things become, potentially with the use of those horrific weapons, that must weigh heavily on the Russian troops fighting, in the sense that, first of all, many of them were, it seems, missold that this was an attempt to liberate Ukraine or was a training exercise, but also that many Russians will feel an affinity to their brothers, essentially, in Ukraine. That will weigh heavily on morale.
Absolutely. I think Putin's greatest weakness is the morale of his troops. You know, we see them in the snow fighting for days and days and days and getting picked off in large numbers. And many of them are conscripts. And it's pretty, fighting is, I spent my life on the battlefields of the world. Fighting is horrendous. If you're losing, it's even worse. And I think the other thing is that the Russian people are not getting the story of the war crimes and atrocities being committed in their names. And if they did, I'm sure they would get rid of this man. And let's hope that GB News is getting through to the millions of decent Russian people so they understand quite what's going on their watch and they do something about it.
Hamish, absolutely fascinating analysis. Really appreciate your time and your thoughts this afternoon. That's Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, former Army Colonel, who's joining us from Salisbury. Thank you so much indeed for joining us. Now, EU leaders today are attempting to find ways to urgently address the fallout from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that, of course, has thrown lots of our economies into peril and exposed a need for stronger defence. For example, Sweden today announcing, normally a neutral country, that it's going to increase its defence spending from 1.2 to 2%. And the war, of course, has also weighed heavily on the growing energy crisis, which is set to dominate a summit being held in Versailles, just outside Paris in France this afternoon. Well, let's bring in the EU's External Affairs spokesperson, Peter Stano, who joins us now from Brussels. Peter, thanks once again for joining us here on GB News. Peter, just first of all, what do you think EU leaders are trying to achieve at this summit in Versailles today?
Good afternoon from Brussels, and thank you. Well, the main aim of the informal summit of EU leaders in Versailles is exactly to discuss the fallout of the Ukrainian war and its impact on the overall European security, because this is the worst conflict we have seen in Europe since the Second World War, and it has tremendous impact on the whole European Union. So the leaders will be discussing, first of all, how to proceed further vis-à-vis the growing atrocities committed under Putin's command in Ukraine, but also how we as Europeans are going to approach it, both in terms of European defense and European economy. That includes also the issues of energy policy and getting rid of the energy dependency on Russian oil and Russian gas.
You talk about that, and we heard from Frans Timmermans, didn't we, a little bit earlier on in the week about how the EU is going to draw down to a large degree over the coming months on Russian gas. But that still poses big problems, doesn't it, in terms of trying to find other means to get that gas into European factories and homes so that the economy continues to function across Europe?
Of course, and this is the reason why we are talking to alternative suppliers. When it comes to gas, we are depending or we are importing 40% of our needs from Russia. So we need to replace this 40% with alternative sources. So, of course, in the immediate term, it will be alternative suppliers, countries like Qatar, Algeria, or others. And we are talking to them already, and also United States. When it comes to oil, also, there will be alternative supplies. But as the European Union leaders have said very many times since this crisis broke out, is that the European Union will speed up its efforts to decouple from fossil fuels altogether. We had the strategy already to go green. The so-called Green Deal means reducing our dependencies on fossil fuels in general. It had nothing to do with Russia, but the context of the Putin's war against Ukraine is just speeding this process up, so that we go for more renewables, more clean energies, and we also cut off the Putin regime from revenues with which he is unfortunately financing this brutal aggression against civilian population and Ukrainian cities and villages.
I don't know if, Peter, if you heard our previous guest, we were talking about the possibility of a chemical attack. We do that because it's been flagged by British and American intelligence in the last 24 hours or so. Is that a red line for the European Union, the use of chemical weapons on European soil in Ukraine? Would that mean that would force an escalation of the EU and NATO's reaction?
Well, of course, this would be total escalation. I mean, this is use of chemical weapons on European soil, this is a red line for everyone. This is a red line for a normal human civilized logic. So of course this would be unprecedented escalation, and the EU would be reacting to it. That said, EU is not a military organization, so of course our reaction would be probably most in the area of economy and further tightening the sanctions which we imposed and which are already massive and are taking effect on Russia's economy. But let's hope it will not get there, although we also get indications that Russians are up to something with these false flag operations, because it's not by coincidence that over the last few days, the Ministry of Defense or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs are starting to spread the nonsense about the alleged biochemical laboratories discovered on the Ukrainian soil. By the way, this is a standard disinformation narrative used by the Russian actors, not only recently. I mean, we as European Union, we are working systematically on debunking Russian disinformation. And we found this narrative in 2017, in 2018, 2019, 2020. Every year, there are examples of this narrative and these allegations about secret labs. Until now, nothing has been proven, nothing has been confirmed. It turns out that it's been lies, fabrications, and now the Russian officials are continuing with them at the highest level, exactly in order possibly to prepare ground for a possible incident involving either biological or chemical agents, which would be totally, utterly unacceptable and would trigger probably a much stronger response from international community.
OK, Peter, appreciate that. Peter Stander there, who works for the EU Commission, live from Brussels. And if you're wondering where those pictures were from, as Peter was speaking, that was from Versailles, of course, just outside Paris, where EU leaders are meeting this afternoon. And we'll have continuing coverage of what's agreed there throughout the day here on GB News. Let's leave you, though, with a story closer to home, but a reflection of what's happening in Ukraine. And that is, of course, the rising cost of petrol. It reached a new all-time average high of £1.59 a litre today. And war in Ukraine and related Western sanctions are causing turmoil on the global energy markets. Our South East of England reporter, Ellie Costello, has been at the priciest petrol station in the country. It's in West London, and here's her report.
I'm in Chelsea in West London today, which is home to the most expensive petrol station in the United Kingdom. And perhaps no surprise that they don't actually have any of their prices up on show. It's not advertised at all. And first thing this morning, I went into the forecourt and I asked them how much they are charging per litre. They wouldn't tell me. I actually had to go to each individual pump and work out the price per litre based on what people had paid previously. But I can tell you, I've done my investigative work, and today this petrol station behind me is charging per litre £2.18 per litre for petrol and £2.29 per litre for diesel. Absolutely eye-watering prices. And to give you an idea of how much money that really is, if you had an average family car, let's say a fuel capacity of about 55 litres, you'd be looking at £120-ish to fill up your car. That is an extortionate amount of money. And motoring journalists have said that in Chelsea, 1 in 10 cars are Range Rovers. They've got a fuel capacity of more like 100 litres. So to fill up your Range Rover here, you'd be looking at over £200. Now, lots of people would say, if you're driving a Range Rover in Chelsea, you're probably okay with a £200 fuel bill. But standing here today, what I am noticing is there are lots of white vans, lots of builders heading to work. They don't have a choice but to drive their large vans around the capital. And half of this problem is the captive market. There are only 4 petrol stations in the local vicinity, and some working people need to get about, and they will be paying these prices because these are the only prices available to them. Now, a few black cabbies have been stopping here by our camera kit this morning and joking that nobody goes in here apart from A-listers. So I've been talking to black cabbies about the rise in petrol and specifically how it affects them here in West London.
Scandalous.
Scandalous. And would you stop here?
Well, when there's a petrol shortage, I did stop here, yeah.
And how much was that then?
I can't remember. I think it's about 190, something like that, 170, I can't remember.
Yeah, I just wouldn't entertain it really, you know. Try and find somewhere a bit more reasonable, you know, which is very difficult at the moment. But this place is notoriously terrible. So no, definitely not.
And is this something that cabbies would avoid? Is this known in your industry?
Oh yeah, this is the worst one round here. Although it's quite an expensive area, but this one is definitely not to be visited. Yeah, you only see A-listers turn up at this petrol station. Yeah.
So those are just some of the black cabbies that I spoke to earlier. But this isn't just happening in London. This is a nationwide conversation, and anybody who drives has probably remarked when they're pulling up at a petrol station at how much fuel is costing in the past few weeks. But why exactly is this happening? Well, it happened when Russia invaded Ukraine, and Russia is the second biggest exporter of crude oil in the world. So when they invaded Ukraine, there were immediate concerns about supply chain issues. And once sanctions were applied by the West on Russia, countries such as the US and Canada started to look towards countries like Saudi Arabia to provide their crude oil rather than Russia. So like with anything, when there's more demand and less supply, those prices will go up. And earlier this week, we were seeing barrels of crude oil going for $140. That is a 14-year high. Now, through the course of this week, they have started to come down, and there will be hope that that will continue to be the case. But for now, that cost, that $114 per barrel, that cost is going to be passed on to the consumer.
There you go. That was Eric Costello reporting from West London. Last couple of minutes, the Deputy Mayor of Mariupol in the southwest of Ukraine reporting that 1,207 bodies have been collected from the streets of that city. There will be more on that story coming up in the news bulletin in just a couple of minutes. That is it from me, though, for today on The Briefing. Arlene Foster is back at 3 o'clock tomorrow. Do not miss that. Up next, though, it is Colin Brazier from 4 to 6. From me for now. Goodbye.
Hello, a good deal of cloud around through the rest of this afternoon and in fact the next few days and into the weekend. There will be occasional brighter spells and it will be generally on the breezy side. Now what we've got at the moment is high pressure across the continent and that's blocking these weather fronts from making much progress. So the setup is fairly stationary. This weather front with us at the moment bringing a lot of cloud across the country through this afternoon into the evening and in fact little change overnight. A southerly flow of air feeding some quite mild air in our direction and again that's the case right the way through.